Jai Hind everyone. I am Achinty Pandey, Assistant Professor in Department of Information Technology at Ajay Kumar Garg Engineering College. Today I will discuss principle of object-oriented programming, right? So, okay. So, what is the paradigm? What is the principle of object-oriented programming? Before object-oriented programming, procedural programming was used or uh, right. So, first we will see ki, what are what is the concept behind procedural oriented programming, how object oriented programming been introduced, and it's been popular today's. So in procedural oriented programming, as the name suggests, the task is divided into various procedure, means functions, okay, and function is basically self-contained block of a statement that performs some coherent tasks of some kind. So in the procedural oriented programming, mainly to develop the software or like that, things are focused into the procedure function rather than the data, okay. So the problem is viewed as the sequence of things to be done, such as reading, calculating and printing, and the main focus was on the function, okay. So the task large program is divided into subtasks, then even the subtask can further be divided into subtasks, and the subtasks be implemented and so on, okay. So the primary focus of procedure oriented programming is on functions, okay. So how the problem is decomposed into task, right, and you can see like this. In the programming, main program is there from where the execution begins, like whatever you write. Suppose if you write something in C program like header file and all, and we just write the main, okay. So main is the function from where execution begins, right. So C program, if C is a procedure oriented programming, okay. So everything is written into or the task or module, everything is written into the form of function. Even main is a function from execution start. So whatever the code is, right, either we write into main or we can create so many user defined functions, okay. So by this diagram we can see that procedural oriented programming, they snap like main program has say 3 function, even function 1 is further divided into say function 4, means function 1 can use function 4, function 2 can use function 4, function like in this example function 2 call function 4, function 7 and function 5 and so on, okay. So everything is written into the function, and wherever or whatever, if the any function wants the functionality to be executed, they may simply call that function, and the code could be invoked, right. So that was the early days of program development or the procedural oriented programming, that's called, okay. So in POP, means procedure oriented programming, problem or task is represented by instructions or you can say actions, okay, and the instruction or actions are grouped into the function, right, means the entire code is written into the different functions, and a function can one function may call another function, means a module can use next module, other module, whatever they wish to use, all right. Flow chart are used to organize these actions, okay, and flow chart represents the flow of control from one action to another. Little attention is given to data used by the functions. So one important thing is that in the procedural oriented programming, the focus is on functions, how many module we can create in the form of functions, not on the data which is used by the functions, okay. So very less attention is given to the data, but in the new developed, I mean object oriented program, we will see that the primary focus is on the data, okay. Okay. Further, if we talk about the procedure-oriented programming, so in a multi-function program, important data items are placed as a global, means global variable, right? If so many functions are using some data, so that data could be declared as a global variable, and that variable, I mean global variable, can be accessed by the all function of the main program, right? In addition to that, each function may have its own local data type, right? There could be global data type whose scope will be global throughout the entire program, and every function could have their local data or variable. Okay, so they are using global data. Now, the global in procedural oriented programming, global data is vulnerable to an inherent change by a functions. That was the drawback, and that is overcome by the object oriented programming, right? So, if data structure is revised, we need to revise all functions that access the data. And further, the drawback is, if suppose we revise the data structure, so we would have to revise the all function and like that, right? But in object oriented programming, we need not require to revise the all functions. We simply create some object of some kind of class, and only in that we can use that. Also, procedural approach does not model the real world. If we want to model the real world problem, then procedural oriented programming paradigm was not suitable. Okay, so that is the drawback of early days procedure oriented programming. So see, I discussed, in procedure oriented programming, the prime focus was on the function, not about the data. Suppose C, C is a procedure oriented programming. So the program start from main. I mean execution always begins from main, and you can see in the diagram, like main is using function 1, function 2, function 3, right? So we have seen that the main thing is the main is using this, even function 1, function 2 use function 4, means any function can be used by all other function, right? Or the function which require, I mean any function which we require to be used by some function, they will simply call that functions, and the execution begins, or you can say the code invoked, and you get the result, right? So here if we see the diagram itself, so main is using function 1, function 2, function 3. Function 1 and function 2 both can use are using here function 4, and like this. Even function 2 is calling function 4, function 7 and function 5, and so on. So the main concern of the procedure oriented programming is the function, not about the data. But in object oriented programming, we will see the primary focus was on the data. Means how we will create the object of some kind, I mean class and all. So these all are some about the procedure oriented programming. In this programming, the problem or task is represented by instructions or actions, and the instruction or action are grouped into the function, right? Flow chart can be used to organize these actions, and basically flow chart represent the control flow from one action to another. Very little attention is given to the data used by function. Okay, the main thing is to design or use the functions. How we'll create function, how many functions can be used. So that was the main focus of the procedure oriented programming. So we just continue. In a multi-function program, important data item are placed as a global. So if a data or variable say are going to use by so many functions, then that data variable in the procedure oriented programming can be declared as a global variable, external storage class, and that global variable can be accessed by the all function of the program, right? So in addition to that, each function may have its own local data type. Okay, and now the global data, I mean the variable which can be used by all function, they are more vulnerable to an inadvertent change by a function, because the data flow among various functions. So of course that global variable in procedure oriented programming could be vulnerable, and that is a drawback of procedure oriented programming. Are the main main objective, or you can say due to that this been overcome by the object oriented programming, where data is hidden, data is kept more hidden, right? But in procedure oriented programming, data is not hidden, data is vulnerable. Like global variable, the data flow among the whole functions, so that could be breached or not secured. Further, if data structure is revised, we need to revise all functions that access that data. Suppose if we change some data structure, so that change is going to reflect, or we would have to reflect in the entire functions, right? Also, procedural approach does not model real world problem. The real world problem cannot be modeled by the procedure oriented programming. It could be better model by the object oriented programming. So emphasis is as an action, not on the data. Okay. So you can see by this diagram that that is the relationship of data and function. Like this, suppose these all are the global data. So we can see the global data flow through the whole function. Like this function, this data could be used by the all function, and like this. So of course the data is not hidden. Data is not secure in procedure oriented programming, and that is the key behind developing the object oriented programming, right? So here we can see that even function 1, function 2, they have the local data, and the global data means they can be used by the all function of the program. So these are a few characteristics of procedure oriented programming, and like emphasis on doing things. Algorithm means stepwise solution of any given problem, rather than creating some real world object or data. Okay, large programs are divided into smaller program known as functions. Okay, so if a bigger task, they could be divided into some small task, and even a small task could further divided into sub small tasks, and so on. So these tasks, like task is divided into say 4 tasks, 4 subtasks, even so means 4 functions. Again 4 subtasks, are each task may be divided into say 2-3 subtasks. So everything is written into the function, right? So most of the functions share global data. Okay, data move, that is the main point. You can say even the drawback, data move openly around the system from function to function. So of course if the data move openly in the system, then data could be vulnerable, and that is not secure, and that is overcome up to the extent by the object oriented programming, in which data is kept hidden, is hidden only the function which is inside the class, they can allow to use the data. Functions transform data from one form to another, and employs top down approach in program design. Means just a large program could be divided in smaller program, further smaller program could be divided sub smaller program, and so on. So the the procedure oriented programming, the approach is top down approach. Okay. So let's see the what are the object oriented programming, or the principle. What are the principle of object oriented programming? So the principle is basically to modularize in terms of object and creating the memory of object. So in the object oriented programming, object oriented treats data as a critical element. Like I already said, in the procedure oriented programming, the main concern was on the function, but in this object oriented programming, the main concern is the data. That is the critical element for the program development. it does not allow data to flow freely. Like in procedural programming, we have seen that global data can be accessed throughout the entire program. I mean, by the all functions. So data is moving freely. That is a point to be addressed in terms of security. But in object-oriented programming, data is not allowed to flow freely around the system. It ties data more closely to the function that operate on it, okay, and protect it from accidental modification from outside functions, okay. Here we think the real world into so many different classes, okay, or you can say objects, okay, and the class which are using the functions. Class have two things, either the data and second one is the functions. So a function which are inside the class, they are only allowed to access the data of the class, not by the other. So data is, you know, secure. No other class can be can use the data of some other class, right? Here the problem decomposed into a number of entity called objects and build data and function around these objects. So the development or programming development is always thought in terms of creating object. We would have to visualize in terms of object. What object could be created, how the objects are going to communicate and all that. That is the key behind or the foundation of the development of object oriented programming. You have to think in terms of objects, so many objects. Like here we can see like 3 objects are going to communicate, and every object has data and functions, and these data, say if object A has this data, or say this object A belong to some particular class, say small a kind of. So this function is only allowed to access this data, not by this object if it belong to some different class, okay. So we can see that data and function of the object are tightly bounded, right? So the communication is not like data is not just going to communicate with the object. If the data is to be communicated, that this could be communicated only by the object, between the objects only, right? Objects invoke the functions and all, right? So organization of data and function in object programming, we can see like this, and data and function are tightly coupled or wrapped into some entity that is called class, okay. So data is encapsulated basically in object oriented programming, right? They have been wrapped into some another entity, and this entity is called, so if it is wrapped, of course it will be more secure as comparison to procedure oriented programming. So the data of an object can be accessed only by the function associated with that object, right? It cannot be accessed by any other function of some different class or object. However, function of one object can access the function of other object, right? The function can be accessed, the function of one object can be accessed, one object can access the function of another object. Function of one object can access this function of, say, object B can be accessed by the function of this object A, but the data could not be accessed directly by this, right? So that is the main things. So these are some features of object oriented programming, and the feature is, say here, emphasis on data rather than the procedure. But in procedural oriented program or early days development of programs, and the main focus was on the actions, I mean functions, not about the data. So here program are divided into object, in that program was divided into the function, so many different functions, but here the real world could be visualized in terms of object, how many objects of the class you are going to create and they are required. Data structure characterize the objects, everything is around the object, right? Functions that operate on the data of an object are tied together in the data structure. Data is hidden Data, here data is, that is the important thing, data is hidden, so data will be more secure as comparison to the early development of the program. So data is hidden and cannot be accessed by external function, where in procedural oriented programming we have seen that global data is vulnerable and they could be accessed throughout the entire program. Objects may communicate with each other through functions. Objects can communicate. There is a say some features like message passing and all, by that object could communicate. New data and function can be easily added whenever necessary. Whenever we want to going to create, that would be easy. If any functionality which is to be added, we would require only to create some new class, right? So in coming futures, if something is to be added, no need to change the existing one. You will simply create some kind of class or object, and by that things could be done. Okay. This follow bottom up approach. Okay, object oriented follow the bottom approach, while we have seen that in procedural oriented programming it is following top down approach. Program is divided into sub program, and sub program is further divided into sub program, and so on. So that was the top down approach, while the object oriented programming is bottom up approach. Okay. So bottom level modules develop first and so on. So further this could be integrated. So this is the standardized definition of object oriented programming. We can say that object oriented programming is an approach that provides a way of modularizing program by creating partitioned memory area for both data and function that can be used as template for creating copies of such module on demand. Okay. So basically everything is in terms of object, and the object takes up memory, right? And object contain the data as well as the functions. Functions of that functions are going to use the data, and this the whole, I mean, data and function are basically wrapped in some entity, and that is called class, right? So due to which the data is more secure because it is hidden, it has been wrapped. So these all are the basic concept of object oriented programming. I mean, the object oriented programming are around with the object, class, data abstraction, and encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, dynamic binding, message passing, and so on, right? Okay. So what are objects? So like we have said, objects are basic runtime entities. It takes the memory in system, right? So object are basic runtime entity, the object oriented system. An object may represent a person, place, bank account, table, etc. Like employee, like customer, like student. Okay, these all are the class, and you can create as many variable. We can think objects are basically the variable of type class, right? So that would be the runtime entities. Objects may also represent user defined data such as vector, time, and list. Program objects match closely with the real world objects. Okay. Okay. Representing an object. This is while modeling, we can represent the object in just by rectangle. Object like object diagram, class diagram, and so many diagrams, standard way to represent the object or even class. It is just by the rectangle. You have to name the object colon class name. Like suppose student is a class, and we are going to create say st1. So st1 colon students, and there basically there are three sections. One is the name of objects, or class, then data and function. So this is the standard way, right? Classes, the entire set of data and code of an object can be made user defined type. Okay, like in predefined, if we say int a, so int is basically data type, a is basically variable. Here in object oriented, suppose if student is a class and you are going to create s1, s2, these s1, s2 and so on, these become the object of type class. So student is what? User defined data type, you can say. So this is the class. So class are basically what? class are basically user defined data type, and objects become the variable of type class, right? So we can create any number of objects like this, S1, S2, S3 belonging to their class. A class is thus a collection of objects of similar type, okay? And for example, these mango, apple are kind of class, fruit and so on. Data abstraction and encapsulation, wrapping up data and function into a single unit is called encapsulations. By that data is hidden and it is a secure. So these all are the some features. Data are basically encapsulated, right? Encapsulated are wrapped into the entity that is called class. Okay, so you can see. Now, another important feature of inheritance. Inheritance means a class can be used by so many other classes, right? Means it is the process by which objects of one class acquire the property of objects of another class. A class could acquire the property of another class, and that feature is called inheritance. That is the idea of reusability. So, you can reuse by this inheritance something, need not to write. You can simply reuse without modifying or without creating that one. So that is very important for software development and all. So inheritance provide reusability, you can see, like bird, flying bird, non-flying, then and so on. Okay. Polymorphism means the ability to take more than one form, right? So that is called polymorphism. If something one thing has different meaning depending on the context, then this feature is called polymorphism. It is the concept and that is implemented by the function overloading or operator overloading. One function perform different kind of task, okay? The same function perform different tasks depending on the type of argument, then this is called overloading. Like sum. So if we pass say integer, they would like if we add something or like sum, if we pass say integer 2, 3, say it will sum 5, but if we pass say string a comma b, it will simply concat. So here we are just starting, but in terms of string we are concatenating, but the function name is same, say sum, okay? So different behavior under different instance, this is called polymorphism, and the implementation is called overloading. Similarly, operator overloading and all that. Okay. Binding means linking a procedure call to the code to be executed. Okay. So, and message passing like object, how the objects are going to communicate, they could be done by the message passing. And how the message passing in the object could be done, we simply name of the object, for example employee, and the function name and the argument. So the function name here is called the message. So these are a few benefits of object oriented programming, and the languages we use object oriented, C++, Java and all, they are object oriented programming languages. These are applications, and these are the simple program is C++ program showing class and object, right? Like we have created a class person, these all are some data like name or age, and these are the functions. So get data and display, they can use only this variable name, age and like this, and this is few syntax. If you are going to define some functions, this is the syntax you have to specify, like you are going to use get data. So first we return type of the function void, then class name, person, scope resolution, and like this. Okay. Similarly, display function. So by the get data we are taking input, and by the get data we are taking input like name and age. Okay, and the by input data we are simply displaying. So how the memory or how the data is going to be created, we have just created this one. In main we will create the object of the class, like person we have here, are going to use person, so we will create the object, and by the object name you can invoke the function like object name dot this function. So the get data code will be invoked, and similarly the object name p dot display, the display function are going to invoke. So that's all about the brief are the principles, and along with that we have implemented a simple program which depicted the class and object. So thank you very much. Jai Hind.